This is Internal Sadist, and I'm Laugh. Today's today's topic is going to be about expectation versus reality. This is a part of a seven subscriber request. Ooh, ooh, feedback. This is going to be a part of a seven. This is two of seven of a subscriber request videos for the subscriber request podcast for the most part. So typically, there's going to be about five more of these. I did one yesterday, and I'm doing one now, and I'll be doing another one again tomorrow. So there will be like five more of these for the most. Well, it'll be like after tomorrow, there'll be about four more of these. What's up, Shinobi One? But this one's pretty much going to be about. This one's going to be about reality, and basically, this is going to be about like expectation versus reality in life, because a lot of people expect things to happen, but it doesn't always seem to pan out that way, if you know what I mean. So typically, what happens is, people get upset, or they get like, they tend to get like bothered by shit for the most part for that reasoning, because at the end of the day, it's really an expectation that you're expecting. It's not what's going to actually happen. It's basically like a good example of that is expecting shit to happen perfectly is weddings. Women expect weddings to go perfectly. What's up, Baron Yam? Well, happy to see you. You were just watching Terrence Pop. Nice. Um, Typically, what happens with that is what a lot of people expect to happen versus what the reality is going to be is good. Basically, I was using a wedding as an example. Now, women expect everybody to fall in line, the weather to be perfect, the everything to be like to their liking for the most part. When in reality, it's not going to be to their liking. Shit's going to fall apart. People aren't going to make it. Somebody's going to be late. Shit's going to happen. Somebody's going to be sick. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's basically shit happens. It's life. Life comes at you fast, literally. The problem that a lot of people have, especially in first world countries, is they have this habit of trying to make the expectations, trying to make expectations reality when in fact they're not. As I said, the problem with trying to make expectations reality is the fact that it's an expectation. You gotta work with it and learn from it for the most part. And typically how expectations work is you expect something to happen. It's basically it'd be no different than if you were to think of something for the most part. Like like people always say something to the extent of it sounded good in my head. That's pretty much an expectation. It sounded good in your head. So when you actually put it out on paper, it may not sound as good as it did in your head for the most part. Some things sometimes need to stay in your head, and it's typically what it is. You can't expect everything. You can't ever expect everything to be perfect, if you know what I mean. Expecting perfect things don't really work out too well for the most part. Expecting expecting people to fall under a certain everything in life, let it be inanimate or animal or breathing or non-breathing, basically, or inanimate. You can't expect everything to go perfectly. Let it be your car, let it be your life. That's the reason why we have planning. The problem is we have a lot of people that like to procrastinate. So when they actually go and do something, they run into more problems on top of the problems that they have already compiled from being procrastinating for the most part. A good example of that is like people who are always like literally on time or on time, or people who are always late, or people who always do things at the last minute and like get to the time clock at the last minute. The problem with that is I'm gonna use the old military adage: if you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, don't bother showing up. It's typically how the adage goes. So what happens with that is there's a lot of people who really wait for the last minute and only have a small window of time to actually make it to where they need to be, like work. There's a lot of people that literally go to work at the last fucking minute. The sad part about going to work at the last minute is there's this thing called traffic. There's this thing called accidents. There's this thing called street closings. There's this street called shit called weather. Things along the line of that actually makes it so you're not going to make it to work at a reasonable time. And the sad part about that is people can't seem to come to grips with that or come to terms with the fact that the reality is life will literally come at you fast. The reality is a street might be closed that you might take normally, but you didn't plan it because you're just so used to taking your one way. So now you got to take an alternate route. And who's to say that alternate routes not blocked off or closed off too? And that's the problem that a lot of people have in their life. They don't plan. They do shit at last minute, and they expect everything to go their way when in fact it's not. That's not how the world works. That's not how life works. If life was like that, then everybody would be millionaires right now. Everybody would make six figures for the most part, or everybody would make 600K or 200K, 250K, if that was the case, if that's how life actually worked. But the sad part about it is that's not how life works, and that's not what's really happening. The irony to it is people live in this bubble or this world of unicorns and rainbows, and they believe that things should happen a certain way when in fact reality tells you that it's not happening that way. Even when reality tells you it's not happening that way, people get mad and they want to make it so that it happens this way. And typically what happens with that is people tend to do stupid shit when they do shit at the last minute, or they make stupid decisions at the last minute because they have no choice but to actually make decisions based on the fact that they're not prepared or they're ill prepared for the situation at hand or the task at hand. Good example, like I was saying, or traffic, or people who go to work literally last minute with like very little time to waste to get in the door. Um, and the problem with that is the fact that a lot of people don't really. What's up, McTown to win? A lot of people don't really plan for shit to actually happen at the last minute, nor do they plan for things to actually take place or do random things for the most part. How do you work from home and still late? You kind of reminds me of the kid from high school who used to literally live. His house was literally on school campus, and he was always late for work. He was always late for school. Like that's amazing. What's up, McTown to win? Like I said again, and you showed Obi-Wan and Baron Yam. But typically, how this works is what a lot of people fail to realize is life is real. Like life is all about reality. It's not about expectations. You may expect shit to happen, but that's you expecting shit to happen. That's an expectation. Expectations don't always work out. I mean, you can get close to an expectation, but think about it. When's the last time an expectation actually fully worked out for you? You possibly, and I'm willing to bet any money you got as close as humanly possible to the expectation instead of actually getting the actual expectation. Um, the thing is, the thing about it is like people expect things to happen, so when it doesn't happen, now they're upset because they grew up in a overprotected world where everybody gets a award trophy, or everybody gets a everybody's everybody wins, or everybody gets in a trophy, or everybody gets a medal, or there's no score, so everybody wins. Like it's just shit like that for the most part. That's typically how a lot of people grow up in this day and age, which really sucks. And the sad part about that is they're so overcoddled and so overprotected that they believe that the rest of their life should be this way, when in fact that's not how this works. That's not how this works in the least bit. And the sad part about it is that a lot of people, when they in fact do it, they typically ignore ignore certain signs and things that shit is off or shit is wrong because they're so hell bent on trying to push a certain agenda, or get a certain narrative, or get to their certain goal for the most part, that they don't realize that shit is going wrong around them before they are able to actually make the decision to actually get out of the, get out before they're basically what happens is they're not able to make the decision because they decided at the last minute that okay, maybe I might want to take this right. When in fact, if you'd have did that, like if you'd have paid attention to the signs and surroundings before that, you could have made that right and could have been out of that shit. And you wouldn't have had to sit in traffic, or you could have made that right, or you could have made the certain decision and basically been out of where you were for the most part. And that's typically how it works. And the sad part about that is what a lot of people fail to realize is what they believe is reality isn't really reality in the least bit. The sad part about reality is it has a funny way of actually, once you think something's reality, it has a funny way of coming back and biting you in the ass for the most part and remind you, no, that's not reality. I'm reality, bitch. Basically, it's typically how it works. And the sad part about that is it can go for any fucking thing, anything from any walk of life. Let it be a let it be a philosophy, a movement, a anything for the most part. Philosophy, a movement, you going to work, you going to school, you procrastinating, you learning things, anything for the most part. Um, and typically how that works is how people typically how that works is how people do things to get to a certain point. They take a lazy route to do it for the most part. They typically, they either a take the same route or they try to use the same tactics to actually get to the same point when in fact shit is altered, shit has changed, and you can't really use the same tactics to actually get to where you're actually going. The problem with getting to where you're going is there's a maroon quote. I'm gonna say it in English. It doesn't make sense in English, but in English it basically translates to show up early as hell just so you can chill. Um, and that's typically how I've always lived. Show up early as hell just so you can chill. Um, because at the end of the day, what happens with being able to chill is you're able to relax and chill and take in the surroundings, take in the scenery, and understand your environment a lot better because you have more time to learn, progress, and perceive your environment for all intents purposes. That's typically how it works. So basically, if you're a maroon, you believe in showing up early as hell just so you could chill. Not all maroons believe that, unfortunately. That's only certain typical groups of maroons that actually believe in that type of stuff, showing up early as hell. Um, but generally, how it works as a whole is people tend to try to force the square peg in the circle hole when they procrastinate or when they do things at the last minute. It's like they have to do actual mental gymnastics to make the rest of their life work perfectly or make it work seamlessly because they're all frazzled or stressed out for all intents and purposes. Is typically how it works. People usually tend to be stressed out or frazzled a little bit after dealing with the situation that they had to deal with because of procrastination. That's typically how it works with men and women especially in life, and especially a lot of men who actually don't really don't really have an open mind, and they tend to be narrow-minded when it comes down to it. A lot of them suffer from this shit, and they tend to be frazzled, or ooh, what the fuck just happened there, stuff like that. And when it actually happens, your visceral reaction is to be angry or agitated, when in fact there's no one to be agitated with or angry with except for yourself. It's typically how it works. So at the end of the day, it don't matter how mad you are at the fact that traffic is fucked up. You only have yourself to be mad at for the fact that you didn't give yourself enough time to properly plan your route or properly plan your day when in fact you came out last minute. Because I've always found when people actually, come out early enough to actually be able to alter or plan things better, they get a little agitated at first, but the fact of the matter is it eventually works itself out in the end. Um, Another problem with shit like that is people typically have a problem with accepting that it's their fault. The reason why they're in this mess in the first place. The problem is though, they'll talk about how how they were on their way to work at the last minute. You know they they were on their way at the work at the last minute, and they waited the last minute on that's because that's what they do. And then they got mad because traffic was wrong, or the light wasn't working, or there was a flood on the street, or there was an accident, or shit like that for the most part. Which you the problem with that is, yes, you can be mad about the accident, but you can't blame nobody else but yourself for ending up at that situation at that time and at that juncture. You can't be mad at somebody else getting to an accident. You can't be mad at the fact that there's a flood on the street. You can't be mad that the light is broken. You can't be mad that a storm came through and destroyed some shit. You can't be mad about shit like that typically, because at the end of the day, it's life. That's like being mad at a lion for swiping your ass for jumping over the gate. That's typically what it is. You're being mad at life. It's like being mad at a lion who swiped you and took a chunk of your skin off because your dumbass jumped over the gate. It is what it is. You made the decision to actually do what you did. Therefore, you have to accept the consequences of your decision making skills. So if you're late, you're late. You just better hope you don't get fired if you're actually going to work. Or if you're going to an interview, you better hope you don't get fired, or you better hope you don't get you know, not picked for the fact that you're late for the most part, because a lot of people in this day and age, especially with the coronavirus and people going back to work, a lot of employers literally will, they'll still accept they'll still accept your interview, but they'll cancel you on the spot because you're late. It's typically how it works. They'll basically say, well, I don't even want this person. I'm gonna just entertain this, but you better be some ridiculous above and beyond person from the even remotely still consider your ass. Typically is how it works. Because right now that's like a nice estimation on how they judge if they want to hire somebody or not in this day and age, especially with the whole entire thing with everybody being laid off and trying to go back to work. They're basically picking people based on if they can show up on time or not, for the most part, or if you're a last minute kind of person. If you're a last minute kind of person, you're probably going to take second seat to the person that's early. And if you're late, you might as well. I hope you got some tremendous, ridiculous amounts of skills, and you're very confident and over cocky, basically, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get that job. And the sad part about that is there's a lot more candidates that came before you that are just as cocky, just as equally qualified, if not just as capable as you are and handling that shit. So you also got to take inspiration too. A lot of the people that came in line before you, you're competing with them too. You may not got to see them, but you're competing with them. And the funny thing about interviews is reality versus reality versus expectation is everybody walks into an interview expecting that they're going to get the job, when in reality you're not going to get the job. That's typically how it works. And then people get upset, like, well, I didn't want that job anyway. That job was gay, or that job was lame, or that job was this, that, and the other. And they make excuses for why they didn't get the job, or they didn't want the job anyway, for the most part. And the reality of it is, you can usually tell in an interview if you actually got the job or not, for the most part, based on how the interview goes. Typically, how the interview goes actually lets you know if you got the job or not. Even if the person says, I'm looking at other candidates and this, that, and the other, there's a certain language or a certain way that the person acts towards you when you actually got the job versus you expecting to get the job because you're just all that in a bag of chips. Like I went in interviews and knew I had the job right off the bat for the most part because I'm Tico. But it's basically the expectations and the interactions with me and the psychology and the whole entire dance of the interview, basically, that actually help me understand that I'm actually getting a job or not. Hell, I've been to jobs where I've actually tried to bomb an interview on purpose after learning like what the person which your on the job skills are, for the most part. Um, like because I'll go into an interview and I'll get a tour of the place for the most part, and there's something about the place that I don't like, so I'll bomb the interview on purpose, so I don't get the job. So you won't even want to do what you say. So you won't even really want to deal with me for the most part. It's like, dude, that's no. Like getting to walk around and you get to see the work environment and shit like that. It's typically how it works. Like no, just no. Like I don't know. I don't like that. That's just ooh no. And like there's certain times when a work environment is not the greatest, so therefore I typically I typically, look at it from that point of view. And I've been one person to actually be able to enjoy what I do for a living. I've never actually worked at a job that I literally had to be there because I needed the money, whereas I've actually worked at jobs where I actually enjoyed them. It's typically different from all the rest of my coworkers for the most part. Anybody that I've ever worked with, I've always been like the only one or the only one of the only two people who actually likes what they do and is not there for the actual money. Um, don't get me wrong, the money was good, but like I actually like what I do, and I don't nearly. Let's just put it this way: if it was a volunteer job, I would do it. It's something along the lines of that for the most part. But how it works is not everybody's in that situation because I know that everybody around me actually needs their job so they can actually pay some bills and have some money, and they're worried about the retirement and shit like that. When in fact, you're dealing with me, where like if I'm on a job, 9 times out of 10, I'm probably banking that money. It's typically how it works. Anytime I work in the United States, I'm just banking that money. So I'm very good at saving. I probably spend all of what 10% of what I make in a year at a job that I work at in the United States. Typically, is how it works. So if I so 10% of we'll say if I work part time, I make 50,000 a year. We'll just say 10% of that's spent on Lord knows what. Basically, the rest of it's thrown in the bank. So $50,000, I would say about like 40 something $1,000 basically is going in the bank. And typically, I'm just basically saying a rough earnings. Basically, 10% of it's basically getting spun, and the rest of it's actually going in the bank for the most part. It's typically how it works when I actually work in the United States. Um, and that's pretty much how it is. That's how pretty much how I've always been. Um, yeah, yeah, all jobs are BS unless you enjoy it. Um, and typically, I've never worked at a place that I actually hated. I never actually worked in a job that I actually hated for some odd reason. And the neat thing about that is you can usually tell the difference between the people who actually are there for the money or and the people who actually enjoy their jobs. Yeah, I know it does. I know it does, Shinobi One. Yeah, I'm stacking both actually. I'm also dealing with other currencies too. Um, typically the currencies that have more that are stronger than a US dollar. I'm actually trading right now. So currencies like that, that are actually stronger than the US dollar that are like, double the US dollar or, triple the US dollar, I'm actually, looking at or investing in for the most part. Um that way when it collapses, the US dollar would be shit and that one would still be worth more than the US dollar either way. Um it's typically how it works. But yeah, I do silver and gold, mainly silver for the most part. Silver's easier to move and easier to trade. Gold is nice to have just on GP, but you know you're more likely to be beat over the head for gold than you are for silver, in all technicality. And you could probably carry more silver than gold. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you can get like gold coins or gold bullion or like the small ones, like the little nugget ones, nugget shaped ones, they're good to have too. But typically, I would say silver would be better because there's more of it, and it's more it for the fact that it's more stable for that reason. Also, another good commodity to actually have in stock and hide is diamonds. Let it be raw or cut. Diamonds are always good to have, definitely. Um, so I do have diamonds. Um, and it's just stuff like that because I'm willing to bet any money that if a market crashes because there's so many diamonds. The sad part about the only problem with diamonds is the only reason why diamonds have a high price is because they're controlled and they're regulated for the most part. If diamonds weren't regulated, they would be cheaper than gold and silver in all technicality. And that's the funny thing about it. When people say, well, diamonds cost so much money, well, they're only cost so much money because they're controlled and regulated. If they weren't controlled and regulated, they'd be cheaper than silver because there's so much of them. And it's not the sad part about it. It's really not all that precious, and it's really not all that rare. You can actually find diamond anywhere for the most part, damn near, for all purposes. The only thing that's more precious, the only thing that's actually worth its value, if not worth more, is platinum. And what I mean by that is platinum's actually worth a shit ton of money because it's very rare for the most part. Um, and typically how that works is platinum is so rare that if you can actually find a piece of platinum or a platinum bar or a platinum anything, you if the world collapses around you, you'd be one of the richest men in the world for the most part. It's typically how it works. So you're going to want platinum. Um, and platinum's actually pretty easy to carry. It's not weighted. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same density as gold. I mean, it's not as heavy as gold for the most part to carry around. Um, yeah, true story of Chernobyl one. It will. It will. So it's definitely good to have it. It's good to have it stock wise, and it's good to have it actual physically too. So you want silver physically, but you also want it stock wise. That way, if you take a serious hit in the stock market, you're you're going. It's going to. Yeah, it did. I was shocked by that too when I seen that. And the sad part about that, all these precious metals and all these things on the periodic table are going to be very valuable for trading for the most part. Um, it's typically how it works. But back to yeah, nobody expected radium to actually go up that high. Um, but typically how it works is people always procrastinate and always get into stuff at the last minute. The problem with getting this stuff at the last minute is now you got to plan and now you got to be stressed out. Now you got to plan and now you got to be stressed out when you actually reach that problem. And the problem with reaching problems at that moment in time is you're not prepared for it because you're too agitated to actually think of something. And the sad part about that is that's when you make more mistakes. And that's when you put yourself out further from where you need to be. Let it be you going to work and you make a right hand turn because you're so upset that you don't want to sit in traffic. Now you made an impulse turn. You didn't make an educated guess turn, you made an impulse turn. When you make that impulse turn, you in turn do things that actually hurt yourself in the process of doing so, which is typically how it works. So at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is put yourself in a situation where your back's against the wall, where you have to make an impulse decision. You want to be able to have enough time to actually adjust to the situation that you're in and make a proper sound decision for the most part is typically how it works. Um, another thing about yeah, expectations are failures to plan. Yeah, that's typically what it is. An expectation is a failure to plan. So you expect everything to happen, even if you. And the sad part about that, even if you plan something out, you're planning it out based on how you want it to actually work. It's typically like what I say in your head. When something is in your head, it sounds great in your head at the moment, but when you actually put it to practice or put it out there, it doesn't always sound great or doesn't always look great on paper or on a live stream for the most part or in a podcast. It sounds great in your head, but when you put it out there, it doesn't always translate to actually being great on a podcast typically. And the problem with that is everybody's working off their expectations or how it sounded in their head. It sounded great in my head. The problem is everything sounds great in your head. Everything sounds great to you in your head up until you actually put it on paper or put it into action. Then it doesn't sound as great anymore, if you know what I mean. And that's typically what it is. It's pretty much that's what it is. You plan this in your head or you thought of this in your head, and then when you go to put it out on paper, it sounded good in your head, but now on paper it's like, I don't want to do this no more. This just sucks. Yeah, it's typically what it is. And people always tend to mix that up with like I was planning with no, that's your expectations. There's a difference between planning and expectations. You can you can have expectations on how your plans are going to go, or you can have plans on what you expect to happen. Big difference. Big difference. That's typically how it works. Customer Service 101, Dr. Yaman, Dr. Shinobi Wan, and Professor Tico. And it's pretty much what it is. Like you can't what you can't do is have things so contorted in your head that you believe that this is how this is supposed to work because I thought it up and it's a great plan. When in fact, it's probably not the greatest plan in the world. It's probably one of the dumbest plans that you ever came up with. And the people have a problem with actually accepting the fact when something's stupid, so they blame everybody else or they blame their surroundings. When in fact, if you'd have probably sat down and thought about it a little bit better after you put it on paper, or if you'd probably put it on paper so you can write it out so you can actually work out the kinks and make it a better plan, you probably be in a better place. But people don't want to do that. They want things to be as easy as humanly possible. It's typically how it works. Not too many people can actually, go from straight from mind to actual action for the most part. Some people have to literally put it on the drawing board so they can actually work out what's wrong with that idea and what's wrong with that plan or what's wrong with that mode of action or the mode of that decision that you're about to make typically. Um and that's pretty much how it works. Um yeah, that's pretty much how it works, but I digress. Um y'all have a good one. Be good. Treat yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk. Do nothing but spoil yourselves. Adios, my niggas.